Welcome back! In our series on Prophet Muhammad, we've explored the historical context of his life and we considered different approaches to studying his biography. Now, let's explore the beginnings of his prophetic mission, how revelation came to him, and his struggle to convey the message in Mecca. Joining me is Dr. Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So what was life like right before the Prophet received revelation?
You mean the Prophet's life in particular?
Yes.
Yeah, he was known to, in our tradition, to be, well, in his youth, a person of impeccable character. He came to be regarded among the Meccans with honorific titles such as Al-Amin as-Sadiq, the truthful and trustworthy one. People sometimes left their deposits with him for safekeeping. And when he got married for the first time, he was 25 years old. He got married to Khadija, who also is known in our tradition as a woman who had commanded respect in her times. Though she was senior in age to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and previously married but widowed, she was known as a chaste and noble woman.
How old was he then when he received revelation and started talking or conveying the message of Islam?
He was, according to our traditions, 40 years old. He had began to meditate in a cave. From time to time, he would go to the cave, meditate, maybe stay for a couple of days or sometimes weeks. Then he would go back to his family, and soon enough, he'd be back in the cave. And it was on one such occasion that he felt the presence of the angel Gabriel, who then began to command him to read. And at first he protested, "I'm not a reader," until he was given the verses which he was to read, verses which are now found at the beginning of the 96th chapter of the Quran, which says, "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq," read in the name of your Lord who created.
So then what happened once he received the message? How did he convey the message to the rest of the community?
At first he was a little bit confused by this whole experience, not knowing what to make of it. If he were in the biblical tradition, he would have known that the prophets were previously addressed by the angel of the Lord. But in the Arabian tradition, one way of interpreting this experience was to think of jinn possession. Perhaps he was being possessed by some sort of an evil spirit, and not wanting to be the instrument by which his people might be misled by some evil force. He began to doubt himself, and he went to his wife Khadija, who took him to see her relative, Waraq bin Nawfal, a man who had some knowledge of the Hebrew and Greek scriptures, and meaning the Jewish and Christian writings. And he assured the Prophet, peace be upon him, that the visitation that he received was from the angel who brought the previous revelations, especially the Torah, to the Prophet Moses.
So who were the first few believers that accepted Islam?
The most notable is Khadija, his wife, because though he had expressed his self-doubt, Khadija had no doubt in him. She said that he is a man of good character, and she doesn't think that God will allow him to be misled by some evil spirit. Waraq bin Nawfal, Khadija's relative who had knowledge of the previous scriptures, expressed some belief in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as well. So too did some persons in his household, for example, Ali, his cousin, and a boy that he had adopted, Zaid, and soon enough one of his close friends, Abu Bakr.
How did the community respond, the broader community that Prophet Muhammad was a part of?
Well, at first he was not commanded to preach this to all and sundry, so it would only be gradually that people will come to see that the Prophet is maybe praying in a distinctive manner, he and his followers, the few that they were. And the community did not like any change. A lot of people prefer the status quo as it is. They see change as threatening, and this is how they viewed the Prophet's practice and his message. His message especially gave them cause for concern, because they had worshipped some 360 idols, or at least they allowed for all these idols to be brought from outlying tribes and to be housed in the sacred house of worship in their city. And they were afraid that the Prophet's message of monotheism, which included also a condemnation of all of these idols, might mean that they would become isolated from all of these tribes. And whereas people were coming into Mecca for worship, and that brought with it the obvious benefits of tourism, they were afraid that the wealth of Mecca would diminish if people heard that there was a preacher here in town preaching against their gods, and if they stopped coming to worship here. So that was one issue. The other issue was the Prophet, peace be upon him, was preaching a sort of egalitarianism, a message that spoke in favor of the rights of the weak and downtrodden in society, the widows, the orphans, the marginalized.
And that wasn't commonplace at the time?
No, in fact, the aristocracy would not allow for that, because it would mean that suddenly there is a claim on the wealth of the rich on behalf of the poor. And of course, most rich persons would think that the wealth they have is somehow acquired due to their own merits, and they would feel a total entitlement to their wealth. And if they give charity, this may be voluntarily if and when they decide to give some charity. But the message of Islam said that the poor has a right to that wealth, though it's not in their possession, it's in somebody else's possession, but it really belongs to the poor, and the rich has to give it up. Not only as a voluntary act of charity, which is also recommended, but also of necessity, because this is not really theirs, though it is there in their possession. Of course, a lot of people would not like a message like this.
So then what happened? Did the Prophet continue staying in Mecca despite the type of, I guess, community backlash he was facing, or did they decide to migrate?
Well, for a long time he remained there in Mecca, but sometimes a man suffers on his own, but he feels some responsibility for his own message, and he sees himself as the cause of his own suffering. But he wouldn't, or at least he accepts the suffering for himself, but he wouldn't accept that for the people who are near and close to him and beloved to him. So the Prophet began, peace be upon him, to advise his followers to migrate to Abyssinia. Abyssinia at this time was ruled by a Christian king, and he was known for his fairness and justice, and it was expected that the Muslim migrants to that country would find fair treatment. And so Muslims migrated in one wave after another to Abyssinia.
So they migrated to Abyssinia, stayed there for a while, and then did they migrate back, and was there anything else that happened, I guess a monumental moment or any other important points in the history?
There was on one occasion a rumor that the Meccans were now favorable towards Islam, and so some of the migrants came back from Abyssinia only to find that the situation had not actually changed. The Prophet, peace be upon him, there remained with his followers in Mecca for some years until we come to what is referred to as the year of sadness. In that year, the Prophet's wife died. This is the 10th year after he had first received the revelation. So you might say 10 years into the mission. And she had been a bulwark of support for him, and so this is characterized as the year of sadness. Well, to add to the sadness, another person who had been quite supportive of him, his uncle Abu Talib, also passed away. Though he had not become a Muslim, his presence meant that the other tribal leaders could not have a free hand against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So though people wanted to attack him, they could attack him in only some minor ways, but they could not go all out and claim his life, because he was under the protection of his own tribe.
I have more questions, but we'll save that for our next episode.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.